The International Ladies Garment Workers Union, the ILGWU, which had been trying to organize triangle workers, emerged from the fire with greater credibility and greater membership. Workers who had previously been hesitant to join the union now saw it as their best hope for protection. Within a few years, the ILGWU had organized thousands of garment workers. The union would become one of the most powerful labor organizations in the United States. And for decades, it would fight for and win better wages, better hours, and safer working conditions for garment workers. The Triangle Factory building itself still stands. It is now called the Brown Building, and it is located on the New York University campus. It has been designated as a National Historic Landmark and a New York City landmark. On its exterior wall, a plaque commemorates the 146 workers who died in the fire. The building cannot be torn down. It must be preserved as a reminder of what happened there on March 25, 1911. The memory of those 146 lives continues to matter more than a century later. Their names have been recorded, even the 6 who were unidentified for so long. Some of their names were Anna Altman, 16 years old, Anina Ardito, 25, Rose Bassino, 31, Vincenza Benanti, 22. These were real people with families, with dreams, with lives that were cut short. They worked in a factory where they were not treated as human beings with dignity and rights, but as production units in a machine designed to make profit for their employers. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire represents a critical moment in American labor history, a moment when the nation was forced to reckon with the human cost of industrialization and unregulated capitalism. It exposed the terrible conditions that workers endured and the willingness of some employers to prioritize profit over the safety and well-being of their employees. It demonstrated that workers themselves, through organization and solidarity, could demand better. And it showed that public pressure and moral outrage could force lawmakers to impose regulations and protections that had previously been considered unnecessary or unreasonable. Today, workplace safety standards in the United States are among the best in the world. Workers have rights to safe working conditions, to fire exits that are kept unlocked and clear, to fire suppression systems, to workplace inspections and oversight. These protections were not granted voluntarily by employers. They were won through struggle, through organizing, through the determination of workers to demand dignity and safety. The Triangle Fire and the 146 lives lost in it remains the most powerful reminder of why these protections matter and why they must never be taken for granted. The fire itself burned itself out within 18 minutes. The flames consumed what they could consume and then began to die down. But by then, the death toll was final. 146 workers were dead. 123 of them were women and girls. 23 were men. The youngest victim was a 14-year-old girl. The oldest victim was a woman in her early 30s. The vast majority were in their late teens and early 20s. They were recent immigrants who had come to America to seek a better life. Many of them had been in the country for only a few years. Now they were gone. The identification of the bodies became a tragic process in itself. Many of the bodies were burned so severely that family members could not recognize them by sight alone. Clothing was burned away. Faces were unrecognizable. Authorities had to rely on physical characteristics, dental records, and items of jewelry that had survived the fire. The process of identifying the dead took days. Families came to the morgue desperate to find out if their relatives had survived. Many discovered that their loved ones had not. Of the 146 victims, 6 bodies were never identified during the initial investigation. These 6 victims were buried under a monument in a Brooklyn cemetery marked simply as unknown. It would not be until 2011, 100 years later, that an amateur genealogist would finally identify these 6 victims and give them their names back. The community's grief was overwhelming. The tragedy occurred in a city of recent immigrants, a city where thousands of other workers and family members could see themselves in the victims. Workers in other factories recognized that the conditions they worked under were no different from those at Triangle. Many of them had locked exit doors too. Many of them had fire hazards as serious as those at Triangle. The realization that this disaster could happen anywhere, could happen to them was sobering and terrifying. On April 5, 1911, just 10 days after the fire, a funeral procession was organized. It stretched for blocks along Fifth Avenue. 100,000 people marched behind the hearses carrying the dead. Thousands more lined the streets to pay respects. The procession was silent except for the sound of footsteps and weeping. It was a public grieving, a collective acknowledgement that something terribly wrong had occurred. In the aftermath of the fire, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, the owners of Triangle Waste Company, were indicted on charges of first-degree and second-degree manslaughter. The charge was that they had knowingly locked the exit doors, thereby preventing workers from escaping the building. The owners denied criminal intent. Their lawyers argued that locking doors was a standard practice in the industry, that the fire could not have been predicted, that the disaster was an act of God, not a result of criminal negligence. After a trial that lasted weeks, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict. The owners were not guilty on all counts. They were acquitted. The legal system offered no accountability for the deaths. No criminal punishment was imposed on anyone. But even though the legal system failed, the cultural and political impact of the fire was profound and lasting. The Triangle Factory Fire galvanized the labor movement. It awakened public conscience. Photographs of the fire, taken by journalists and photographers who had rushed to the scene, were published in newspapers across the country. The images, bodies lying in the street, a scorched building, grieving families, were impossible to ignore. Public opinion shifted. Demands for reform became louder. Labor unions grew stronger. The tragedy of Triangle became a rallying cry for worker safety and labor rights. In the years following the fire, New York State passed new laws regulating factory conditions. The state created a factory inspection system with real authority to enforce safety standards. New laws required that exit doors be kept unlocked and clear. New codes mandated that buildings have adequate fire escapes. Fire drills became mandatory in many factories. Sprinkler systems, which could have prevented or contained the fire at Triangle, began to be installed in buildings. The changes were not immediate and they were not complete, but they represented a real shift in how society viewed worker safety. Some workers attempted to descend the Washington Place stairwell despite the smoke and fire. They moved down into the burning stairwell, their eyes watering, their lungs burning from smoke inhalation. Some made it out. Others collapsed from smoke inhalation before reaching the bottom and died in the stairwell. The overcrowded elevators that might have offered an alternative route quickly became unusable as the fire spread into the elevator shafts. Workers waiting for the elevator found themselves waiting in front of a shaft from which only smoke and heat were now pouring. The mechanical systems that operated the elevators stopped working as the fire damaged the machinery. Workers on the 10th floor, where Max Blank and Isaac Harris had their offices, received warnings almost immediately. Phone calls came from the floor below. There was a fire below. They should evacuate immediately. These workers, including the factory owners, moved quickly to a stairwell and descended to safety. Not one person on the 10th floor died in the fire. For most of them, evacuation was possible because they received warning, and the exit routes that they took were open. On the 9th floor, most workers had no warning, and their exits were blocked. As the fire reached the upper floors, workers began to climb out onto the fire escapes. The building had only one fire escape, a wrought iron structure on the exterior of the building. Workers pressed out through windows and onto the narrow metal platform. More and more people crowded onto the fire escape, which was designed for a fraction of this load. The metal, weakened by the heat and overloaded by the weight of dozens of desperate people, began to buckle and warp. The fire escape collapsed, spilling workers into the street 8 stories below. Those who had been climbing down it fell like dolls dropped from a height. Most of them died in the fall or on impact with the ground. The arrival of the New York Fire Department offered hope that was quickly dashed. Firefighters responded quickly to the alarm, but when they arrived at the ash building with their equipment, they confronted an impossible situation. The tallest fire truck ladders in their possession reached only to the 6th floor of the 10-story building. The fire was on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. The ladders fell short by 30 feet. Firefighters could do nothing but watch from below as workers appeared at the high windows. The fire department had brought nets designed to catch people who jumped from burning buildings. But the nets were small, designed to catch one or perhaps two people at a time. They were not designed for the volume of people now at the windows. Workers faced an impossible choice. Inside the factory, the heat was becoming unbearable. Flames were consuming the fabric and wooden furniture. The smoke was so thick that visibility was nearly zero. To breathe was to inhale smoke and carbon monoxide. People were collapsing from smoke inhalation. The pain from burns became intolerable. Many workers had already decided that they could not survive the fire if they stayed inside the building. Some removed their shoes, others took a last look at the street below. And then they jumped. One by one, then in groups, workers began to leap from the 9th and 10th floor windows. They jumped from windows along Washington Place. They jumped from windows along Green Street. They jumped into the street 30 feet below, hoping to survive the fall, hoping for mercy. Some were caught in the nets that firefighters held, but even when caught, the impact of a falling body from such a height was often fatal. Others missed the nets entirely. Many of them landed on the pavement and died instantly from the impact. Others lay alive for a few minutes, broken and bleeding, before their injuries claimed them. Onlookers in the street below watched in horror as the bodies rained down. Some of them wept. Some of them ran away, unable to witness the horror. Some of them remained and did what they could to help the dying and the dead. But at Triangle Waste Company, the owners refused to fully comply with the strike settlement. Max Blank and Isaac Harris rehired the workers who had participated in the strike. Yes, but they refused to recognize the union in any meaningful way. And they refused to address the safety concerns that had been raised. Most critically, they refused to unlock the exit doors that led from the factory floors to the stairwells. The owners locked these doors during the workday, a practice that was legal at the time. Their stated reasons were to prevent workers from taking unauthorized breaks, to reduce theft, and to prevent union organizers from entering the factory. What the owners were less willing to discuss was that locked doors also meant that management could control the flow of workers leaving at the end of the day, allowing them to inspect workers' pocketbooks and bags to ensure nothing was being stolen. This practice of locking workers inside had become standard in many factories, accepted by the authorities, ignored by the public. On the morning of March the 25th, 1911, 490 of the factory's 500 workers showed up for the Saturday half-day shift. They settled into their places at the sewing machines on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. The workday proceeded as usual. The machines clattered. The needles flew. Time moved slowly in the heat and dust. At 4:30 in the afternoon, as the workers neared the end of their shift and the prospect of rest, a fire began on the 8th floor. The exact cause was never definitively determined, but historians believe that a discarded cigarette or a spark from machinery ignited cotton scraps and paper waste accumulated under some of the sewing tables. In a factory filled with thousands of pounds of dry fabric, in an era before fire suppression systems, fire would spread with terrifying speed. As the flames started on the 8th floor, workers there immediately realized the danger and rushed to escape. Most of them made it out. Some headed down the stairwell. Others climbed through a small door that led to the roof of the adjacent building, and from there they jumped down to safety. The exits on the 8th floor were not locked, and workers there had crucial seconds of warning before the fire reached them. But on the floors above, a different situation was unfolding. The fire spread rapidly upward through the ash building. The flames moved from the 8th floor toward the 9th and 10th floors, fed by an abundance of combustible materials. Fabric, cotton scraps, paper patterns, wooden tables, and machine parts. All of it burned eagerly. Black smoke poured upward through the vertical gaps in the building. The windows on the upper floors began to glow orange from the heat below. Workers on the 9th floor became aware of the fire when they saw smoke appearing under the factory doors. Some of them had just finished their last seams and were preparing to leave. The clock at 4:40 showed that quitting time was nearly here, and then the smell of smoke reached them, acrid and sharp. Someone shouted, the alarm spread. Workers rushed toward the exits. The 9th floor of the Triangle factory had only 2 doors leading out. One stairwell led down to Washington Place. The other led to Green Street. When the workers tried to exit, they found that the Washington Place stairwell was already filling with smoke and flames. The route that way was no longer possible. They turned toward the Green Street stairs, the second exit, but they found that door locked. Workers pounded on it, screaming, pulling at the handle. The door would not give. Later investigation determined that the door opened inward, meaning that even if it had not been locked, the pressure of dozens of people crowding against it from inside might have made it difficult to open. But the lock was the fundamental barrier. Max Blank claimed later that the door had been locked because he needed to prevent workers from taking breaks and pilfering goods. Whatever his reasoning, the locked door now meant that more than 100 workers on the 9th floor had no means of exit except through the rising smoke and flames. On the afternoon of Saturday, March 25, 1911, as the sun began to set over Manhattan, a fire broke out in a garment factory nestled among the towering buildings of Greenwich Village. The fire would last only 18 minutes. In those 18 minutes, 146 people would be dead. Most of them were young women, many of them teenagers, immigrants fresh off the boats from Italy and Eastern Europe, earning their living as seamstresses in one of New York City's deadliest industrial disasters. Their deaths would shock a nation and forever change the way Americans thought about the rights and safety of workers. The Triangle Waist Company factory occupied the top 3 floors of the Ash Building at the corner of Green Street and Washington Place, just a short walk east of Washington Square Park. The building itself was relatively modern, completed in 1901, 10 stories tall, with an iron frame and a stone facade that looked substantial and permanent. The factory that operated in the upper levels produced shirtwaists, which were fashionable blouses for women, garments with tight waists, decorative buttons and collars, and full puffy sleeves that were in high demand during the early years of the 20th century. The owners of Triangle Waist Company, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, had turned their factory into one of the largest and most profitable shirtwaist manufacturers in New York City. By 1911, the factory employed approximately 500 workers, almost all of them immigrants. The vast majority were young women and girls, many of them aged between 14 and 23 years old. Most were from Italy or from Eastern Europe, Poland, Lithuania, Russia. They had come to America seeking opportunity and a better life. What they found instead was exhausting, poorly paid work in crowded, dangerous conditions. The workers labored for 9 hours on weekdays and an additional 7 hours on Saturdays, 6 days a week, for wages that were barely enough to survive on. Many of them lived in cramped tenement apartments in the surrounding neighborhoods, sending what little they earned back to family members still living abroad. The working conditions in the factory were typical of the garment industry at the time, which is to say they were deplorable by modern standards. The floors were cluttered with wooden tables piled high with bolts of fabric, thread, scissors, and the accumulated debris of garment production. Scraps of cotton and linen covered the floors and clung to the rafters. The air was thick with cotton dust and the heat from the gas flames that powered the sewing machines. There was minimal ventilation, and the windows were kept closed to prevent the dust from escaping, which only made the air more stifling. The workers sat at their machines in rows, moving their hands rapidly day after day, assembling sleeves, setting collars, stitching seams. Many of them developed sewing-related injuries. Carpal tunnel before it had a name, eye strain from working in poor light, chronic back pain from hunching over their work. The Triangle factory had been the site of labor struggle in the years before the fire. In the fall of 1909, workers had organized a strike demanding better working conditions, shorter hours, and higher wages. The strike lasted months. Thousands of garment workers participated, walking picket lines despite being threatened and beaten by hired thugs. A young woman named Clara Lemlich, who worked at Triangle and was only in her early 20s, became an organizer and public speaker for the strikers. By November 1909, thousands of garment workers had joined the strike, and the labor movement was paying attention. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union, the ILGWU, called a mass meeting. 10,000 workers packed a hall to discuss the general strike. The momentum was building. By February 1910, the strike was settled. Workers at many factories gained recognition for their union, shorter hours, and higher wages.